Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 65th episode of the Unbox, starting off with a question from Alejo Ruiz Kamauer, saying, question, how will players get their money when they help a friend complete a quest or a mission since they didn't really get the quest? I think there's going to be a couple different ways this can actually happen. One of them is probably going to be via the beacon system, to where you can basically just put out a broadcast to other players to see how they can help out. Basically, if your friend takes on a mission, they could use the beacon system to have you help, and then you could negotiate a price based on that. So they would end up making money based on that price that you guys agreed. So let's say the mission was going to pay out, 15,000 UEC. Maybe you give them 7,000, you keep 8,000, or something to that extent. It could also potentially be that missions are going to require multiple ships. Like maybe you take on a mission that says, I have a whole sea and I'm requiring 2 escorts to take me from point A to point B. Well, then all of a sudden you would need 2 ships to be able to take that on. So in that situation, maybe that mission ends up being given to 2 different people and not just the one. Or you can end up accepting the mission, taking somebody else on, and you guys split the profits. So I think there's a couple different ways that's going to play out. But I think most frequently it's going to be there's an overall job payout. You know what that is. And in order to accomplish that goal, otherwise you're not getting the money, you then have to bring whatever is necessary. So maybe if you've got something like, a Redeemer with a couple NPCs, you may not need to take on, 2 different missions, or you may not need 2 separate ships. That ship may be enough. Whereas if you only had a Gladius, you may say, okay, well, I probably want somebody else to come along because I know this is going to be very dangerous territory, so I'm going to pay out a little bit in order to accomplish that. The same thing could potentially go for cargo. There's 200, SCU that needs to get moved. One freelancer max isn't going to do that, so maybe you need 2 of them in order to accomplish your goal, whereas if you had a whole C, you wouldn't need to pay anybody else. So I think it's going to kind of be based on something along those lines, and it's really going to end up being how you end up allocating the money afterwards. Bam Mitchell's 8 says, if a bounty hunter goes into a place like Spider to take out a wanted man, do you think NPCs will just stand by and watch, or will they step in and try and help out the outlaw? I think this is probably going to be a couple different things. If you as a bounty hunter have a decent reputation there, probably nothing is going to happen. But I think it also depends on the affiliations of the person that you're trying to capture or shoot. For example, if you're trying to take down a mob boss and there's all these other mobsters in there, they're probably going to make it harder for you to capture their boss. If it's just some random pirate scum that's in a bar somewhere and nobody there has any affiliation to them, they're probably not going to bother because, there's no honor among thieves, that kind of old saying. So I think it's going to depend on kind of the reputation system that's in there, both yours and the person you're going after. And then just if they have any like in-game friends that are in that general area. So I think you're going to get a little bit of both, and you're really just going to have to be prepared to deal with whatever gets thrown your way. JagX says, will I be able to find and build and own a space station and profit from it by selling fuel and fees and such? By the way, love your videos, are very helpful. Thank you. Glad you like them. So I've talked about this a little bit, and I think we need more information, and I think it depends on scale to a certain extent. I think as far as a full-blown space station goes, I don't think you're ever going to own a space station. And I don't think one person is ever going to control a space station. Now, I think an organization could potentially take over a space station and kind of take up residency there and kind of run things the way they see fit. But a space station's more like a bangle, to where there's not necessarily that never-ending, there's not that permanent persistence. And since there's not that permanent persistence, if you log out and all your buddies do too, somebody could technically move in and take over. So that's a little bit more complicated. Now, on a smaller scale, we do know that we're going to be able to build like planetary bases. So, if you're creating kind of an outpost where people can come and you can generate profit from that, then yes, I think I see that happening. But I think from an economy standpoint, there's nothing that's really going to stop you from being able to sell goods and kind of profit at a certain location. I think it depends on the type of location you're talking about on whether you can quote unquote own that or not. Marcus H says, what ship loadouts would you recommend for a HOTUS player in Swarm? I think it depends a little bit on if you're talking Vandal Swarm or Pirate Swarm. If we're talking about Vandal Swarm, one of my favorites right now is the Saber Comet. That's what I'm actually flying in the video in the background. The scatter cannons are phenomenal. They're pretty forgiving. Now, it's a shorter range option, so you really need those on the Comet because it's pretty fast and can get you up close. The mass drivers on it are pretty decent as well for a little bit longer range engagements. It's pretty fast. The shields recharge at a reasonable rate. So I think the Saber Comet is a really good option. Now, the catch there, though, is the Pyro Bursts are currently very broken in multiplayer. So that's only really good for if you're doing single player, Swarm. And that kind of translates over to Pirate Swarm as well. However, Pirate Swarm brings in heavier ships. In Vandal Swarm, you're just dealing with the little fighters. Now you get more and more and more of them, so it increases in challenge and how difficult it is. But in Pirate Swarm, when the Cutlass comes in, and when the Vanguard comes in, and when the Constellations come in, the amount of durability those ships have is significant, and they can end up dealing a lot more damage. So for my mind, when I'm actually playing Pirate Swarm, I prefer to bring like a Vanguard because it can deal a lot of damage as well as take a lot of damage, and it can kind of help you get through that whole thing. Real Arc says, because of the massive changes to the Caterpillar, what do you think the best roles will be for the Caterpillar? Also, do you think the Caterpillar can be run effectively with 4 players, no NPCs, 1 player, and a Saber as a wingman? So as far as what do I think the best roles for the Caterpillar are, it's a little bit complicated because we don't necessarily know what all of the modules are going to be that you can install. We know there's going to be some things, like there's probably going to be a scanner module, there may be like a turret module. There's probably going to be some like exploration type modules, some salvage type modules. So the flexibility of the Caterpillar should be legendary, but the problem is we just don't know what all those options are going to be when they finish them. But in the Caterpillar's current state, cargo is the obvious one. You've got 4 cargo modules installed on it. Past that, I think salvage would be a pretty good option for the ship. It's got a whole tractor room to where you could actually potentially grab things out of space and kind of drag them into your cargo hold, especially since you've got the side opening doors. It should facilitate that pretty well. I think those are the 2 primary ones that I see on the ship at the moment. But I think looking down the line, things like exploration can open up. I think search and rescue can open up. I think, maybe even like a kind of like an interior support ship for a convoy if you can end up putting on a lot of turrets. So I think there's flexibility there. But until we actually see what the final version of all these different modules are, I would say exploration to an extent, but primarily cargo and salvage. Derek79 says, speculate on a ship for me. Ben mentioned there was a forthcoming small salvage ship in the pipeline some time back. Since a small ship will not be able to collect everything like a reclaimer, what will be the focus of this ship? Will you look for high valuable materials to rip apart like the Prospector? Will you disassemble the ship to get valuable components? So I think what you're primarily going to be doing in a ship like this is looking for components. I don't think you're necessarily going to be like trying to find unique ways to break down the ship itself. In the 10 for the Chairman that I covered a couple days ago, they were talking about the salvage role, and they said that some people are going to go and just rip out the high value components and leave. Other people are going to stay there and sit there and actually process all the individual goods. Well, since you can't process all the materials in a smaller ship like that, and even if you can, you're not going to be able to carry very much of it, you're better to maximize your efforts and really focus on getting the good stuff. So I would say this ship is probably going to be something that has some sort of cutting blade on it, whether that be physical or some like energy weapon that allows you to kind of carve out the valuable pieces. Or it could even be potentially more of like a scanning ship that can help you identify what some of the better salvage pieces are. And then on board, it carries and comes with handheld utilities that you kind of then EVA out for and have easy access back into the ship. So I don't really know. If I had to guess, I would say it's going to have some equipment on board that you can actually handle from the pilot seat, almost like the Prospector. But I think it's going to be more focused on getting the good stuff that you can sell at a higher price, as opposed to since you can't deal in volume, the scrap metal becomes a less of a benefit. Dorian Reich says, questions. How do you feel about the Polaris hangar and primary weapon loadout? I was expecting a decent-sized main gun, not just torpedoes for capital ship fighting. To me, the hangar seems like it takes up too much of the ship's potential. Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on it a little bit. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the Polaris. I think the missiles or the torpedoes are going to pack a punch, and on a ship that size, you're never going to be able to have a big enough weapon to deal a significant amount of damage to something like, an Idris or a Javelin or, something above its weight class. taking the torpedoes with you maximizes the damage output that you can deal, and on the bigger targets that you're going to be fighting, they're going to have a harder time evading something like a torpedo. So if you're able to come in really, really fast, deploy your torpedoes at the last possible second, zoom out, and then kind of come back in for a repeat run, I think that's a situation where it could do really well. I think we also got some confirmation that they're not size 4 turrets like it was initially mentioned. They're actually size 4 weapons on the turrets, and you've got 5 of those. So all of a sudden, I think it's 5, as well as missile turrets as well. So all of a sudden, you're talking about like 10 size 4 weapons on the ship. Now, like I said, that's not going to be something that's going to deal a significant amount of damage to something like an Idris or a Javelin. But what that could technically do is help to keep shields down or help to lower shields to maximize the effectiveness of a torpedo going in. So again, I think they're primarily there for the ship's defense, but based on the size, I think they're big enough to help on an offensive type of role, and it's enough to make the ship pretty scary. Now, as far as the hangar goes, I kind of like it, I kind of don't. It's kind of in that weird middle ground. It could be a little bit smaller, and maybe you do get a main gun that is beneficial, or it could be a little bit bigger without sacrificing too much of the potential, like maybe you lose out on the missile turret, and then at that point you're able to add something in there like a Redeemer or something a little bit bigger. So I found it to be kind of a strange size overall, but that being said, the ability to bring something like a Saber along, or a Super Hornet, like those types of ships have value, and especially since they're going to be shorter range, it kind of gives you some flexibility into moving a fleet. And from that perspective, I do like it. So I don't have any real issues with the loadout. I think it was just a little bit different from what we all expected it to be. But I think it gives it the capability it needs to be a significant threat to other ships. On our last question today is from Q and Dmar. Which sort of things would we be able to trade as goods? Will there be, for example, cheese? I see myself becoming the #1 space cheese merchant of the verse. I don't think there's going to be any real restrictions to what you can trade. If you look at things like Elite Dangerous as an example, there's a lot of different things, whether it be aluminum or steel or gold or silver. Like there's all these different metals and ores that you can trade in. You can also deal in like computer components or vegetables or meat. Like there's a whole lot of different things out there. Now, what Star Citizen's going to end up doing, we don't know. I don't know if you're going to become the space cheese merchant of the verse, but it may be a little bit more generalized. Like maybe you could be the Dairy King of Stanton, so something like that I think is going to happen. But we'll just kind of have to see how far they want to go. We do know from one of the more recent around the verses, I think it was, that they're going to start out general and then get more specific. So we'll start off with food, then maybe we'll get, meats or veggies or dairy, and then past that maybe it becomes like chicken or steak, or peas or beans, or cheese or yogurt. So I think it's going to continue to develop and get a little bit more advanced, but there's going to be a stopping point to where they say it just doesn't matter anymore. Dairy may be good enough, maybe you don't need cheese. So that's this episode of the Inbox. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have questions, get them in. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Have a wonderful day. Take care.